Hi, I wanted to talk about primitive reflex integration today, and I wanted to specifically talk about the spinal galant reflex. My name is Reena Singh. I'm an occupational therapist. I've been working with kids with various developmental disabilities, mainly autism, for the last 25 years. And I want to share my insights related to this spinal galant reflex today. So, when I started working, initially I used to use sensory integration as a framework, and then there was a lot of everybody was talking about primitive reflex integration. And I was also very keen. When I was in my college, we did learn a lot about primitive reflexes. That was how we use primitive reflexes to work with kids who had cerebral palsy and to work with physical and motor challenges. But as time, so that time during my college, that was somewhere into 1999, I was like really into primitive reflexes. Then once I started working, I was mainly using sensory integration. And then I started reading books after books on primitive reflex integration because I was really interested and it seemed like the missing link which would help any child who has a diagnosis of autism. So that's how I went into this rabbit hole. And the first book that I read was by Sally Goddard Blythe. It's called Reflexes, Learning and Behavior. I remember reading this entire book within 2 days. And how much went in, it took me a lot of time. I had to reread that book around 10, 15, 20 times to kind of get a gist of it. I read all the books by Sally Goddard Blythe to understand about primitive reflexes. Then I started learning more about RMT, that's rhythmic movement training. I took a lot of courses with MNRI, that's Mazgutova Neurosensory Motor Reflex Integration. It was like, I really wanted to do more and more and more and more about primitive reflexes. So, what exactly is the spinal galant reflex? Spinal galant is a reflex which was named after this neurologist, Johann Galant. I'm going to be referring to my notes while I tell you because I don't want to make any mistakes in the information that I share with you. So, it was named after this neurologist, Johann Galant. This reflex emerges in the utero, which means when a baby is in the womb, and around 20 weeks. So 20 weeks is around 5 months or so. So when the baby is in the mother's womb, that's when this reflex starts emerging. Before I go ahead, every primitive reflex will emerge, it will peak up, and then it will get integrated. So it's always like a inverted U. Okay, so that's how the every reflex has a function that it fulfills and then it integrates. When it integrates, it doesn't mean it'll never come back. Reflexes are there to take care of us for protection and survival. So it emerges in utero at 20 weeks in utero and it is active at birth. So when a child is born, this wiggling that a child does, along with ATNR, okay, these two reflexes together help a child to come out of the birthing canal or the during normal delivery. This reflex inhibits, which means it gets integrated between 3 to 9 months and it helps and it transforms. So every reflex will transform into a mature reflex. So spinal galant transforms into a amphibian reflex, which is a postural reflex. There are many studies which also say that spinal galant is connected to the development of the auditory sense while the child is in the utero by acting as a conductor for sound vibrations. So a lot of kids who have an active spinal galant reflex also benefit when we do auditory intervention protocols. Okay. Now, what are the common things that you would see if this reflex is present? If so, one is how do you test it? Now, I wouldn't suggest testing because we do not ever want to elicit a reflex. What are the signs? What are the ways that you would know that the reflex is present? One is that the child would be constantly fidgeting. This area at the back is very sensitive. And every time that the underwear line, the elastic touches the lower back, the child is wiggling like this all the time. That's why this reflex is also called as ants in the pants reflex, or it's also called that way because it makes a child very wriggly and the child is always moving around. And that is also something what you would see in one of the books that's called Movements That Heal by Dr. Harold Bloomberg. He says if a child has hyperactivity, that is ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, work on spinal galant reflex. So that's how spinal galant would present itself when it is present. A lot of kids would have difficulties getting toilet trained and potty trained if this reflex is present. Children would not want tags in that part of the back, they would not like it. Some kids, when they have this reflex present, they can't pay attention in the class because every time that the underwear lining touches on the back, they keep, squirming. And because of that, they lose the focus. They are not able to focus on what the teacher was talking about. And so that makes them very distractible and also very inattentive. So, what do we do if this reflex is present? As I told you earlier, if I just work on primitive reflexes and if I don't work on strengthening the postural reflexes, it is not going to be any help. I would want that the child has good control over the postural muscles. There are good writing reactions, equilibrium reactions. They are all very, very, very important. And we also want that the developmental movement patterns, the transition patterns that a baby goes through when a child is growing up, like, coming in prone position, coming in sideline position, what are called as postural problems in sensory integration. Like the kids have difficulties with prone extension, kids have difficulties with supine flexion, kids have difficulties with lateral flexion and trunk rotation. These are all the patterns which need to be worked upon. So only integrating the primitive reflex will not help. You integrate the primitive reflex and you also work on postural reflexes. Both of them are equally important. So this is one exercise that I would do if I want to work upon integrating the spinal galant reflex. Child sits with the legs in the front, with the hands crossed in the front, and just walks towards you. This is one way by which you can integrate the spinal galant reflex. The other way that I work on with the spinal galant reflex is, as I said, I strengthen the postural reflexes. So, working on prone extension, working on supine flexion. A lot of work is needed to work on lateral flexion, because this lateral flexion that I'm doing is what actually the spinal galant reflex is all about. So I would work on these exercises which I've shown you. And if you want more details on how to work on exercises, I have my app Autism Insights, where I have detailed lectures and detailed explanations about each of these primitive reflexes and how to work on with the postural reflexes. And you can subscribe to it and we can meet weekly. I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions related to whatever that I spoke, you can comment down below. I'll see you next week.